podcast, and it's a solo episode for me today. So, the topic at hand today is struggles of a modern yoga teacher. So the modern yoga teacher being a very modern phenomenon. The yoga teacher is a professional. I remember when I my main yoga teacher, I would say, apart from Sharat and Mysore, was Mark Darby. I've mentioned that often, and the debt I owe to him really for everything that he taught me. And on talking to him, he said we were dropouts. We never expected to make any money off this, right? In fact, almost the opposite. That purposefully dropped out. And these days, obviously, people go to Mysore and many other places, to do TTs to make money, to have a career out of it, which is fair enough, but it makes the context rather different. And there's lots of possibility for disappointment there, I suppose. Anyway, before that, let me just say that obviously I've started my intensive. If you're listening to this and you still want to join the intensive, the next to it's 5 episodes, 5 weekends, and we've done one, but you can hear the recording later, and you can join for the next 4 if you really like, and get that recording. Anyway, other than that, we've got Bali coming up in February, I believe, a 2-week retreat in Bali, and it's going to be amazing in Ubud. So I love Bali and I love Ubud. Join us there, maybe. Malaga's full at Christmas, but go on the waiting list, and you never know. People often have changes of plans and have to drop out, so you might get a spot there. So let's crack on. Let's see if I can get started on this, because there's where to begin. I think people think it's an easy thing to sign up for, right? We quit the corporate job, and now we're going to be a yoga teacher. It's not as easy as that, right? Because obviously the corporate job comes with many, many pressures and problems, but the yoga teaching as a job is not as easy as all that. And perhaps you don't have those obvious nagging kind of crises of conscience that you might have in a company, money making and etc. But, really a lot of the kind of ambition and a lot of the backbiting, even a lot of the integrity, in fact, is the same. Actually, when you get into it, it's no different. And I hate to be cynical, but, I often tend to be in the end. It can be worse, right? So what is that? Well, first of all, when you get into it, you realize there's not an obvious definition, right? I mean, the confusion of the modern yoga teacher is partly due to the confusion of modern yoga. Like, what is it, right? And what was it? And what are we doing now? And in between those questions, there's a lot of grey space, right? And we've just discussed the history and the tradition of yoga on previous podcasts, and the innovation that's taken place in the 20th century, 21st century, to give us what we have today, which is basically, when we talk of yoga, an asana practice, jumping around for a couple of hours on a mat. Doesn't make it not valuable, right? But it's different to what it was. So there's this lack of definition. What exactly is our role? Because we're not personal trainer exactly. We're not guru, I hope. We're not any kind of spiritual advisor, like a priest or anything. Yeah, but sometimes seems like we kind of fulfill that role. We're not a psychotherapist, right? Either, although we can do that. Or social worker, although sometimes that's expected. But none of those things, we shouldn't be any of those things. Yeah. But then we're a little bit of all of those things as well, in a certain way, because we're not just a personal trainer. Or maybe we should be. Yeah. But then that confuses the idea of yoga teacher further. Right? And so people come with a mixture of expectations, and maybe some of them unfounded, maybe some of them inappropriate, but nevertheless they're there. And we're also struggling with what exactly are we, and how do we embody the role in the right way, in the way that's appropriate, in the way that feels like it has authenticity, without being necessarily just a service provider, just talking about anatomy and leading a class in a rather perfunctory way, but not necessarily a spiritual advisor. Overstepping the mark in that capacity, right? Or even people get into the realm of physiotherapist or even doctor, right? As if they can sort you out when you come to the class with a particular injury. Just do this, this, this. Well, I don't believe in that either. But on the other hand, there's often a lot of pressure for the teacher to do so. Yeah. And remember, as I mentioned at the start, the teachers are professional these days, or at least professional as much as they're making money out of it. So in which case they should act as a professional. But this is the $1 million question, the ambiguous question. What does acting like a professional as a yoga teacher mean? Because, we are taking money, we are charging for a service, so therefore there's an element of business around it, right? And there's expectation, and there's kind of consumer demand, if you want, right? What do I get out of it? Why should I come to see you? And so the teacher is easily thrust upon this issue and oversteps the mark or feels the need, because other teachers down the road are going to say, they can do this for you. Maybe they're going to make more claims, even if they don't actually say it, to being even some kind of enlightened kind of being, right? And so what do you do if you're trying to keep students? And often the students don't give you any time either, right? We'll come to that in a minute. The logistical format of the class system that we teach in doesn't really allow us necessarily easy access to developing teacher-student relationships in a slow, patient, methodical way. It really is catch them now or maybe lose them. Even one class. So there's a crisis of integrity going on there potentially, right? But we'll come back to that in a second. I next want to go on to those expectations a little bit more, how the student might feel of the teacher, right? And that is a really, really tricky question because, of course, we don't necessarily mean to project all these things on the teacher, but the teacher being an ambiguous role, the modern yoga teacher having really no context around. I mean, we don't have any role context around it, right? Because they're not exactly even a school, like a school teacher or a university teacher, that kind of teacher either, right? There's something a bit different, yeah. But they're not, or shouldn't be, as I said, any type of guru or physiotherapist or even parent, right? Like we often treat the teacher as a benevolent, maybe benevolent or even strict parent who will be able to lead us in the right direction for our lives. They know more than us somehow. And the teacher is often thrown, or at least maybe even believes their own hype, into being put on that spot and acting like that person that knows more. And what I'm going to say now, from my perspective, I know maybe you don't want to hear that, but I don't know any more. I don't know any more than you. I have a steady practice for 25 years. I have a lot of existential questions. I hope I have a sense of empathy and sense of, let's call it empathy. I'm not really keen on talking about awareness, because awareness of what? But a sense of connection, empathy, or a wish to do so. But I'm not going to make any extra sensory claims, extra terrestrial claims. I don't think that's the right word. Anyway, so the student comes with all these expectations. There's a pressure on the teacher as well. That's what I'm trying to say. And yes, of course, they're unfounded, but the teacher is in this crisis of, well, they're in business, right? And that means bums on seats. In other words, numbers, right? They need numbers in the class in order to make a living, because if your classes have been anything like mine, often you're paid a base wage and you're paid then per student. So it makes a huge difference depending on how many students you get. Yeah. So you need numbers, and that makes things potentially tricky as students filter into your class and you want to keep them, and they might not come back if you don't make the class fun and maybe fulfill some of those expectations that they have of you as some kind of sorted out, otherworldly even yoga teacher, which I've definitely been. I have to say, I'll put my hand on my heart, and I've definitely say that, due to a lack of confidence, I've been there, because also the lack of the sense of understanding our role as teachers gives us this endemic insecurity, I think, or at least on my part it did. It's not like when I was a cook. I worked as a cook before in London. It was clear. You made the food, you did your mise en place, yeah, you did the service, yeah, in the restaurant at night, right? You did all that stuff and you cooked okay and the people were happy. There was a clear job definition. You do this, and we expect this out of you. But as a yoga teacher, what is the expectation exactly? It's not always clear. Yeah? And that makes it really easy to fall into this uncertainty about what we're doing. And then lurks from this insecurity, it's a small hop, step and a jump to imposter syndrome, right? Because we don't really know what we're trying to be in the first place, right? As I said, we're not PT, we're not psychotherapists, we're not physiotherapists, we're not social worker, nor we're a priest, but we're a little bit of all of those in a certain sense, right? Yeah, because we're not just teacher or service provider necessarily. Or I don't think I feel that will be shortchanging the role. Although I understand that there's a sense of honesty around that, just saying, oh, I'm just a teacher of asana. And yes, it's true. But, if that were the case, then really it's the same as being a gym instructor, which I'm not sure it exactly is. Not to say it's better. Yeah, I'm not saying, an yoga teacher's more than exactly. In fact, in some ways not. The gym instructor often knows much better anatomy and the mechanics of the body, unfortunately, than the yoga teacher, the PT. But nevertheless, it's different. The role is a little bit different, a little bit more, somewhat more nuanced, perhaps, right? Because the person coming into yoga doesn't have the same expectations usually as gym. There's some kind of, like I said, existential wish here, for something more, to see something differently in life, to have some more meaning in life, right? to be better, to feel better in a deeper level than simply cosmetic, which, we assume is more the focus of the gym. But nevertheless, of course, it's not just, because whenever we're moving our body, really, there is a deeper intention, I believe, even for the gym, of course. Having said the opposite, I didn't mean to. Anyway, so we don't know what we are exactly, and then you fall into this imposter syndrome of trying to be something, because really, and I've thought about this, and you might, or hopefully you can tell, really what we are is a holder of space. A holder of space for people to experience themselves. The space of not having to be a certain thing, because usually in a role to a certain person, right, the student has a certain obligation to play their part in it. So if we're a physiotherapist, for example, then they're their patient. If we're the priest, then they are the congregation, as it were. Yeah. If we're the parent, they're the child. Yeah. If we're the lover, they're the lover. Hopefully not. Nevertheless, you see, this possibility of this space and this ambiguity of the role of the teacher in a certain extent is quite incredible, because it gives this profound opportunity for change. When the teacher is just a holder of space, and the opportunity for the person to show up without being anything particular, demanded of them as a certain role, that possibility of transformation is really, really present, is really potently possible, to transform in a space where, for a minute, the fetters of material obligations and conditioning, etc., are freed from them, freed from us in this space, because the teacher is holding that space. But what does that mean? Essentially, they're a teacher of no thing, then. No thing being space, nothing. So then it's easy, again, it's that short leap into feeling, well, I'm an imposter then, because I'm none of those things. And, well, I really don't know, and I shouldn't, I probably shouldn't give structural advice on how to, even how to amend injuries, because, we don't exactly know, of course. I mean, we can, of course, I'm not saying you don't say anything to the student, but really, there is this kind of capacity of feeling somewhat powerless in the role, because we aren't any particular role, but then we are. This idea of space again comes back, but it's not valued in society. So it makes the teacher feel like, well, society doesn't value me, and the individual possibly. Oftentimes, we as students don't even know that we're benefiting from this holding of space necessarily. I mean, after a while, I think we do. Yeah. After a while, I think my students often say to me, you held that space for me to turn up as I wanted to, and to get through stuff without judging me and keeping patient with me and supporting me, or not, but giving me space and not telling me what to do. I think that's, for me, that's the greatest gift that almost anyone can provide for you, to give you the possibility to experience yourself how you want to be, because then you can change. If you're allowed to be as you want to be, only then can you let go of things often. Only then can you have the space around your head to change ideas, to reconsider ways of being that haven't been effective for you. But we don't often have that space in life to just think again. So it's such a profound, potent space. But again, as I said, it's no thing. So society won't value that. And the cliches of the yoga teacher floating around in white, etc., don't really help either, right? We feel we're mocked. I don't know, I speak for myself, somewhat in the social, we're not valued. I'm not saying the yoga teacher should be valued necessarily like a surgeon, although, I don't know, or, doctor or whatever, but in some ways, equally, right? Because they're this provider of something, as I said, this has the profound value of possible transformation for the individual. It's a bit of a mouth tongue twister there, but it is incredibly valuable. And something which is so rare in society these days. Nevertheless, it's not valued, and I think the yoga teacher internalizes that and then thinks, well, I'm not really worth it. My role is just and then they try to hide behind other things, right? All the language anatomy of, yoga anatomy language, these days, right? Because I'm a body worker, or I'm a professional, and this to prove their professionality. We don't need to prove anything, but we feel like we constantly need to prove our worth. Or even the guru, right? Even more worrying. Yoga teacher becomes guru, starts to claim that they've got a higher connection to consciousness, and the individual should, I don't know, just follow whatever they say, I suppose. Yeah? Wouldn't want to be in that role myself. But nevertheless, there's this feeling of trying to fill this void of holding space with something tangible, because we feel like we're not professional enough. And then I think because one is not treated in that manner, the yoga teacher can easily internalize this idea and stop acting as a professional. And of course, we've probably all seen that in the yoga sphere, that people don't necessarily, the yoga teachers I'm talking about here, act as professionals, right? It can be incredibly immature, unfortunately, and it's not just the fault of the yoga teacher, I think it's also the structure that I'll come to in a minute of the way that of the kind of network in which they're teaching. Yeah? But before I do, I also want to just say, look, but people are turning up in that space and moving their bodies, particularly moving the spine, yeah, and experiencing the stimulation of the nerves around the spine, yeah, which is a kind of somewhat reworking for the president of Kundalini, after all, right? Something to do with the central channel and the potency of that energy. And people are doing this, right? Even the beginner is turning up, flexing their spine, bending their spine. That's the unusual part of yoga as a modality, right? And what separates it from football or rock climbing or piano playing as a practice, yeah? Because all practices, all practices, you could say, involve concentration and consistency, yeah? But the yoga practice is a tantric practice. The hatha yoga practice is a tantric practice because it's using the spine. And when you use the spine in such a dynamic manner, in these particular shapes, it throws up all the stuff that's attached to moving the spine in that way. And we've talked elsewhere in other podcasts, I believe I have, about why moving the spine is emotional and why and how it can resolve emotions. Yeah, so I won't go there now. But basically, you're dealing with, to put the bottom line in here, you're dealing with people in emotional situations with themselves. And unsettled, ungrounded, potentially a little bit. Not exactly in their normal sense of self, let's put it that way. But the thing is, it's even the perfect storm because the teacher isn't either, because the teacher's also doing a practice stirring themselves up as well. So everyone in this position is potentially rather somewhat, that emotionally, let's say, you're going through something, and you're meant to, it's not meant to be calming all the time, this practice. It's meant to stir the pot so you can resolve the pot. Imagine all this emotional sediment and all this rubbish that holds us back is compressed usually. Yeah, it's compressed deeply compressed into our being. And the only opportunity we have got is to unsettle, unlodge all that stuff, throw it up into the consciousness again in order to get rid of it. That's why I think we have this idea of churning the pot so often in Vedic literature and Vedic metaphors. Churning the pot, churning the spine, to throw all this stuff up so we can either resolve it or get rid of it. Basically let it go and change and have the freedom to move and change like an organic being, because all we really want is space, and in that space what we want is freedom. The freedom to think again, to be different, to be how we want to be ultimately spontaneity, in the true sense of it, right? Anyway, that's a whole other question, so let's get back on track. So yes, the teacher's in this frontline situation, really, on the front line with many people, and they're all coming in, pouring in all the time. Because the other thing I wanted to get onto is the structure is just not that helpful in many ways. The lead class, the lead class with a kind of generalized name and time slot is endemic now in the yoga centers. Yeah? And when I started, there weren't yoga centers. You run your own classes, and they were usually evening classes, and you got your students that come because they were locals, and well, they stuck with you usually because there wasn't much else yoga. And there was just a sense of, well, this is what we want to do and we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, even for a while, right? But these days you've got yoga centers. Most teachers, and I ended up a number of years ago in London teaching for a big yoga center. And really, when I quiz people about why they came, I'd say, I don't want to say it, but I'd say a good half to 2/3 probably came because the time slot worked for them. They didn't know whether it was Ashtanga or Vinyasa or God knows what. Yeah? Just that the time worked for their work. And I'm not making any judgments about that. Totally understandable. But nevertheless, you're in this situation as a teacher, right? Well, that's unfulfilling in the first place if the person just coming because they come for a time slot. Secondly, right, that kind of means that you're probably going to see all different people like through every class or every week, you're going to have a few familiar faces that stick with you because they like you. But most of all, it's going to be a lot of thoroughfare, a lot of change, all different people coming through. And maybe you see them now and again. Or maybe they just come, once and you never see them again. So you're dealing with all these different people. So, one, that's unfulfilling in the first place for a teacher, right? And that's a struggle. I'm talking about our title here, Struggles of a Modern Teacher, because, you don't get to build up those relationships and you don't get to see what people are like over a longer term in order to maybe try and help them with their practice, right? And you also feel that you've got to impress them straight away to stick with you, right? Because remember, the yoga teacher doesn't really have colleagues either, oftentimes, but competition, right? Your colleagues are your competition, and you've got to make sure that you get those students, right? If you want to survive, right? And that means that maybe you have to get them, they might not give you a second go. So you have to get them first time round, right? Quite a lot of pressure. And it also involves you probably sacrificing a bit of integrity sometimes in order to keep the students, make the class fun, give loads of information, right? Really go and make a big connection with those new people, right? All these things that maybe would be better done over a longer period of time, slowly and consistently and patiently, methodically, have to be done straight away to get that sale, as it were, get that person to return to you, right? It's hard. It really is. And then you don't really get that support from your colleagues usually. I know some of you have said, I did a reel a while ago suggesting that a yoga teacher's life could be lonely. And some of you said, well, no, I've got great colleagues and I'm, genuinely happy for you, of course. But that doesn't often or usually pertain to the situation. In my experience, your yoga teacher colleagues, especially from the same style as you, see you as the competition and don't necessarily share ideas or want to share students with you, of course, right? It's just the way it is. Yeah. So in that element, in that situation, you see, we don't have that professional life with colleagues. And I think that makes, and maybe that's one of the biggest difficulties for the yoga teacher. Don't have colleagues around you to kind of feed off, to bounce ideas off, to maybe soften your edges, or maybe soften that ego, right? Because you can easily believe your own hype if you're a successful teacher, right? And you don't have any colleagues around you. And I can think of many of these people. And then you're just with your students who sometimes idolize you. There is a lot of adulation, and I'm not saying it's right, but it happens. And then you don't have these colleagues to kind of take you down a peg or two, nor do we actually share much information. In which case, if all the teachers got together and shared everything they knew and worked together, just imagine how much we could have evolved yoga to really fit the modern context more. I'm not saying we'd make something new, but we'd adapt the traditional yoga teachings better, I think, if we all shared. But we don't have that, yeah? Nor do we have a mentor usually. Usually in TTs, you do your TT. I mean, I never did one, but I was pre-2000, but from around 2007, 2010, I think TTs really started to kick off, and you just churn out these apparently fully formed teachers. But of course, the teacher isn't fully formed because they've never really taught. And what you need is a mentorship program after the TT. Almost more important than a lot of that TT, really, that just fills the 200 hours or whatever, right? But we don't have this mentorship program. I mean, any other profession has a mentorship program, notwithstanding the fact that the yoga teacher is, as I said, working on the front line with vulnerable people, with people putting themselves in vulnerable states and entrusted with a hell of a lot, right? They're on their own with 30 people in a class potentially or whatever, right? They're on their own without any supervision, yeah? Worrying. And the yoga centers don't really help with that, right? Yoga centers want you to make sure that you have the numbers and you feel the pressure to provide the numbers. They're not saying, how can we help you more? Usually just making sounds about your low numbers or something, or moving your class around because some bigger teacher might be able to do better in that spot and they're putting you here. And that's my experience anyway. I'm sure that there's other situations and I'd love to hear about them, but the yoga center often isn't the most supportive to teachers, and they don't necessarily want to be, because you see, they don't want the teacher to have their own following oftentimes, because then the teacher could take that following down the road, right? So they're moving and they're doing these kind of all levels general classes to make sure that the teacher is a service provider in the end, that they could be replaced, right? Because if the teacher has too much power, then they can start making their own demands, right? i.e. for a living wage from the center, for example, because of course the teacher is paid usually too little. Yeah. And that doesn't really help oftentimes with their morale either. Yeah. It also means the teacher's turning up frazzled because they've had to do another job or run around to 10 different classes in 10 different areas just to make their living. Now, you could say, well, they shouldn't be a professional yoga teacher then. They should do something else. Yeah. Valid point, but, what if you love to do it? Or what if you've always done it, like many of us? You did it before the market was saturated, and now you're in the situation where it's not so easy to make a living anymore than originally it was. Maybe you consider doing something else, but if you want to carry on doing it, you've got to admit it is hard. Right? Again, I'm not giving any career advice or necessarily saying quit job as a yoga teacher or doing something else. We're just acknowledging the fact that there are some serious challenges here, and you're not on your own with that, I suppose. Yeah. So, other ideas, ambivalence of the student to hierarchy, in this current situation, and I'm not saying, they should respect everything that the teacher says, but we have this uncertainty now, right? Like, I'm here to do my own practice, but on the other hand, people seem to want to be taught something. And again, this is maybe just my experience. There is this ambivalence. They seem to come to want to be taught something, but yet they don't listen to the instructions in the class either. You find them doing handstand when you're suggesting another posture, or patently not listening to your instructions whatsoever. It can be frustrating, but more than that, confusing, really, right? You don't know where you stand. Should you be slightly strict? Yeah. Should you stress your authority? Or in this current, more democratic age, should you be like a mate, a friend, a little bit softer? Then I'm constantly falling on both sides of this fence. Well, actually, I think I fall too much on the soft side, to be honest. But it is. A lot of students, getting those two mixed up. A lot of students say, I like a strict teacher to me. And I'm thinking, well, maybe, and then even for me, I think, oh, maybe I should be a little bit stricter. That's what they want, but it's not in my personality. So at the end of the day, I think all of this probably comes down to the fact that you've got to be yourself, because you're never going to please every person, right? And trying to do so is going to take you so far away from yourself and your own authenticity, you're going to be completely lost. Yeah. Especially when you're dealing with all this thoroughfare of all different students, all different levels, crammed into one lead class. Very unsatisfying to teach often, because it's impossible to teach in that way. Yeah. Plus the centres giving you stress for numbers. Yeah. Plus you're having this competition with your other teachers. And you've got no mentor, no one to talk to, really. Your partner, but, like they've heard it all before. So, it's not easy, again. And then, you're out at work when everyone's having fun, out, relaxing and doing yoga, right? We didn't talk about that. The fact that the lifestyle is absolutely antisocial. Yeah. And also, if you're trying to do yoga as your lifestyle, right, living, not only working as a yoga teacher, but living the yoga lifestyle, you become pretty antisocial in the first place, right? You're probably not going to go out drinking and doing those things you did before, whatever they were, late nights or whatever. You want to lead a healthy lifestyle and get to bed at a reasonable time and eat healthily, etc., etc. Then it does put you at loggerheads with a lot of your old friends, probably. And then you're working when they want to do stuff anyway. So you're living this quite solitary life. And then you've got all this stuff, on top of that. It's not easy. I mean, it's not to say, like, I'm not putting it out there that the yoga teacher job is the hardest job in the world. Of course it's not. Of course there are benefits, right? You're not working 10 hours a day down a coal pit, for example, as my forefathers in the UK were, or my grandparents working on, coming from Ireland, working on building sites, for 12 hours a day for no money in the rain and cold in the UK in the winter, So I feel very fortunate, of course. It is a bit of a privileged situation to go on whining about being a yoga teacher these days, but we also need to take it seriously, the challenges, and also take seriously, I think, the need to be professional and take ourselves seriously as professionals, even if we're not necessarily treated as such. Because I think the standards can slip easily when we feel like we're not being treated as professionals. Then in the end, we maybe don't act as professionally as we could do. But Then again, there's many, many reasons, as I mentioned, the ambivalence about the role, the ambivalence about the expectations, the fact that it is this practice which is meant to be emotionally unsettling, logistics, yeah, of how the classes are set up and the way that we're asked to teach, the fact that we've got so much competition that we feel like we have to make our classes different or special or fun, or so it differentiates us from everyone else and we get those students. Loads of problems. Isn't there with anything else, though? So as I say, all I'm saying, I suppose, is don't necessarily quit your corporate job to become a yoga teacher. There's problems here too, loads of them, yeah? And all that kind of ambition and all those kind of intrigues at work, they can all exist in the yoga realm. Don't worry. Between teachers, I've had my fair share of them over time, right? And then finally, if you're teaching a Mysore class, then you're speaking to people every day, the same people, right? And that has its own challenges, right? Okay, you see those same people now, whereas in a lead class you didn't. This time in a Mysore, you're seeing them all too regularly, and you're feeling this sense of powerless. Well, I know I can't actually change that person. Like I want to give them progress. I want to help them. And of course you do, but over a long period, yeah, which doesn't necessarily make it obvious that progress is happening. I mean, they often say to you, and I've had it many times, I feel I'm not making progress. And you can see it because, 6 months ago, they couldn't do X, Y, Z, but they don't feel it. And you feel, again, that pressure. I haven't helped them enough. And that's what I think one of the reasons that the teacher ends up over adjusting or pushing people into postures. They feel the pressure to progress the person, right? They haven't done enough, because holding space, as I said, being a purveyor of no thing, just the space for them to be and to grow and to exist and change as they really transform potentially, but nevertheless it's not valued by society, yeah. And that student often, us as individuals, we don't necessarily understand what's going on for the longest time either, yeah. I think subconsciously we know that there's a space that we want to drop into that space, but on the conscious level we kind of still feel we're there to make progress, right? There to get the leg behind the head, there to complete primary or intermediate series, right? Yep. On a deeper level, yes, something else, but there's all these expectations that get stirred up in us, right? We want the student, we want the teachers to help us make that progress. And the teacher knows, if they've done it for a period of time, if they know their body at all, that it doesn't work that way. There's other things like genetics going on, right? That with the best will in the world, you can't change someone's body to be able to do something if their bone structure and their muscle and the tissue just won't do it. And there's many situations where this occurs because the practice, especially of Ashtanga yoga, is very advanced really in terms of what it demands, flexibility and mobility of the body, incredibly advanced. And we don't see it necessarily because we're the 0.1% of people that could do those things genetically, a lot of them, some of them. But it is, even Lotus, incredibly advanced for the hip, especially for a Western hip. So we have this sense again of being an imposter. Well, what can we really do? We can tell them technique, but often technique, you see, the irony of technique is you can understand technique when you can do it. And then you can realize how to do it better, of course, using technique. But technique often explains what the body does. That doesn't always lead to doing it. Yeah. So then again, we feel like, well, what can we really offer? And that's when I think people either get into the realm of adjusting, trying to push someone into something because they'll feel that will make them happy, and they feel the pressure as well as a teacher, and they feel the lack of satisfaction as well in their role. What am I doing? I want to see the results of my own work, kind of thing, right? Or they go down the yoga anatomy realm where they become some kind of physiotherapist or something like that, which is, I think, is not the role of the yoga teacher either, really. As I say, we're not trainee surgeons. You only need to know certain things, to be honest, as a teacher of asana, right? Don't pull the shoulders out of their joints. The knee is roughly a hinge joint. Try not to bend completely at the lower back. Take it easy. Yeah, don't push yourself. Try and find isometric stretches, i.e., a stretch where one muscle pushes one way, the other muscle pushes the other way. Yeah, don't push into pain. There's only really we don't need all that yoga anatomy talk, really. We only need a few basic anatomical understandings. Sorry, not grammatically correct. We don't, but you understand what I mean. We don't need that much. But nevertheless, there's that sense of insecurity. So, this is often what happens in the end with the yoga teacher, or they end up purveying, I'm a kind of semi-guru, again, all the stuff around the chanting and the yoga philosophy. I think often comes from that same insecurity, rather than just giving the person space to be and providing that space, a bit of encouragement, support, which is no small thing. It's a huge thing, but it feels like to the teacher not enough. So then they try and add on. And I'm not saying it's always the case, but I'm speaking for myself, which is all we can ever do. Then you try and add on all these extra things, right, to justify one's worth, which is great. If and you're interested in those things, that's good. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that as a Mysore teacher, day in, day out, year after year, not seeing necessarily there'll be a plateau with a student, your friend, your friend, but your student hits after a while. As I say, I don't think we should necessarily be mates with our student, friends with our students, but it comes that way as well. Then there's this also friendships, and that complicates the issue as well. And sometimes puts even more pressure on the teacher to perform. Yeah, but the student hits a plateau. And then what do? You see him week after week, day after, and you're still not able to do that much for them. And then that's easy. Then it's an easy place to enter into all this extra stuff of justifying one's role, whether it be through kind of guru-esque kind of maneuvers or yoga anatomy, or pushing them further into trying to get their body to break out of its old patterns, which is a bad idea in my perspective. And the yoga philosophy, I don't mean to say it's not a bad thing, it's no, or chanting, it's not no way a bad thing, and it's definitely fleshes out the asana a little bit potentially, but it seems to be an adjunctory practice from the hatha yoga, which is about this space to experience the stuff that the spine turns up in the consciousness when you're doing the asana practice, which is to say that the asana practice is a practice in and of itself. Hatha yoga, forceful yoga, is in and of itself a practice. Yeah, you don't need to make more out of it than it already is, but doesn't always end up that way. So I suppose I'll stop now, because I think I've given it a good thrashing out, and I'm sure you can come up with more ideas as to the struggles that you faced or you perceive in this current industry, because that's what it is. And I suppose that's another thing, just the confusion itself of, well, we want to be a yoga teacher, which is not a corporate, is not a service provider, it's not someone just paid to, we feel like a calling, somewhat of a vocation, but nevertheless, we're in business too. And this is a real difficulty if you're anything like me, a kind of confusion in one's own mind over the years too. How much should we do for free? Should we do for free? Yeah? Maybe people don't value us if we do it for free, but nevertheless, we don't want to just feel like we're just working for money, because we could have done that with something else. What's the right wage? What's the right wage? And what's the right service cost for our services? Yeah. All this stuff makes it somewhat more straightforward just to have a 9-to-5 job. Maybe. But I never had one. I mean, I was working as a cook, which certainly wasn't 9 to 5. It was usually 3 to 12 or 1 in the morning. 3 p.m. you come in, you start chopping veg, and you finish, very, very late. Then you go out for drinks and socializing. So not a good lifestyle at all. And on that note, I can't really feel any other segue to finish this podcast. So on that note, I'll stop it there and wish you a very good week. And if you felt like joining anything or joining a workshop, just get in touch with me, and we can chat. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear what you thought about this today. Anyway, I'll be back next week with a proper guest. I hope you have a good week, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye for now.